How do you do, buckaroos? This is Joe Leydon of Cowboys and Indians Magazine. And as we approach the 10th anniversary of Hell on Wheels, I decided to reach out again to producer John Wirth to share some memories about the classic TV Western. Now, if I understand correctly, you came on board as executive producer at the beginning of the third season, correct?
Yeah. And I think you and I talked in Calgary. We had
Right.
an interview at the hotel right around that time.
Right. And that was the episode Big Bad Wolf was the first one. That
started the third season, yes. And that was written by Mark Richard, and I wrote the second episode that year, which is the favorite thing. It's my favorite script that I've ever written. That was the one where Colin Bohannon had to hang that Mormon boy.
Oh, yes.
And really powerful story, beautifully acted by Anson and Common. And Adam Davidson just did an amazing job directing that episode. I thought I was so proud of that and thought, wow, this is what it's like to work on a premiere show.
Well, and also that planted the seed for all kinds of complications down the line. Yeah,
absolutely.
But when I was talking to Anson the other day, I told him there's a line, in that first episode where his character goes to jail to confront, Doc Durant to, get his help. And Durant has the line, I thought you were dead. And Colin responds, yet here I stand. And I told him, and I'll tell you, there's probably not an episode of the show where it would not have been appropriate for Colin to say that. It was like the gods were against him. The universe was against him time and time again. Yeah. And yet here he stood.
Same could be said of the railroad itself.
Now, a class show. And look, I can truthfully say, I think Hell on Wheels may be one of 3 at tops 4 series, which I saw every single episode of. I mean, I don't think I've today, I don't think I've ever seen every single episode of The Fugitive, but that was back in the days when, a show would be on for maybe 36, 39 weeks, a season. But there would only be 13 weeks of reruns.
Yes. So
even now, I'm in my 60s, and I'll still run across an episode of The Fugitive.
Yes. Yeah.
But I always got the impression that aside from the loyal fan base, Hell on Wheels was one of those series that really didn't get its props. It didn't get its respect that it was due. I think the entire time it was on, I think there was 1 Emmy nomination for the theme song, and that was it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm interrupting you. You were about
No. Go ahead. I was leading up for
yeah. I mean, during the coronavirus, people were putting together lists and things to binge, while you were sitting around at home and, gaining weight and all that sort of stuff. And Hell on Wheels made it onto some list. I can't remember what it was now, but it was, like the 10 best shows you haven't seen, or something like that. And the person who put together the list said the way he or she put it was, this show was seriously slept on, which I think means, people just weren't aware of it at the time, when we were on the air. And I always felt that way. I mean, as I said, writing that episode, my first episode out of the gate on this show, it came out so well. The writing staff on that show was so smart and so committed. Anson is the best partner I've ever had in terms of the star of a show. Every actor was, brilliant. And I always felt like it was a shame that our people, and by that I mean our writers, our actors, our directors, our costumer, our production designer, John Blackie, who did just a phenomenal job creating that world. I mean, that was a real world building show. We never got our props. Nobody did, ever. I thought there were many episodes that came out of that writer's room that stood with the best episodes that were being written for television at the time. And it was as if we didn't exist. And even, I'll say, AMC, as supportive as they were, and they were, we always felt like we were kind of the redheaded stepchild over there. They had Breaking Bad, a brilliant show. They had Mad Men, a brilliant show. They had Walking Dead, which is what it is. Mm-hmm. And they had us. And whenever you would see anything about AMC or anybody at AMC talking about their slate, they would talk about those 4 shows and they would never mention Hell on Wheels, which I just found really fascinating on the one hand and frustrating on the other hand. And I don't know why that was. I think, I think there's been some, I think when they look back on it, they may be revising their opinion of the show in terms of recognizing how good it was and the kind of legs that it had. Joel Stillerman has told me himself that, that he regretted not hanging on to that show after he developed it. And he was always extremely complimentary of what we were doing on the show. So, I mean, they supported us. There was tremendous support from that network for the show, even right to the bitter end. I remember talking to Susie Fitzgerald. We were having some financial issues at the end of the series. The very last episode, we were over budget. And I was getting a lot of pressure from E1, the company that owned the show, to take money out of the last episode to the tune of probably $1 million+, which just would have gutted that episode. And to her credit, Susie Fitzgerald got on an airplane. She flew to Calgary. She came out to the location. She came into a trailer and she had a meeting with the E1 money people who had flown out from Toronto. And she said, "We love this episode. We love the script. We have supported this series every step of the way. No changes. We'll work out the money after this is all done." And we made that episode. And I thought that episode was really cool. There was things there. I mean, we had the 2 railroads coming together. We had massive cast. We had Cullen Bohannon getting on a boat and sailing off to China, so there was a lot of, we had to send him to Victoria to film those, water sequences and stuff. I mean, it was, for us, on the budget that we had, it was really a serious undertaking. I mean, I look at shows now that friends of mine are doing where they have $5, $6, $7, $8, $10, $12 million an hour to make the show. It's astonishing that we made this show for $3.5 an episode. I don't know how we did it. Smoke and mirrors, Joe.
There you go. Well, another thing about that final episode, you bring it up, what I loved is it was like a perfect circle. The monologue that Cole Meany has at the end of that episode is sort of the mirror image of the monologue he has at the end of the very first episode of the series.
Yeah.
And I don't know whose idea it was to make it that neat, that balance, but and I don't know how many people noticed that, but as
Yeah.
soon as he started, I thought, oh wow, they're going to do this.
Yeah, I mean, that monologue he had in the pilot, I thought was brilliant. I thought the Gatons, I really liked that pilot. I thought the Gatons wrote really a beautiful pilot, and they set up what turned out to be, as I said, a beautiful series. That monologue was really stunning. And when we were designing that episode, Jamie O'Brien and Tom Brady wrote that script, and they went off to write it, and I didn't know who wrote what. Usually we did a lot of people worked on other people's scripts on that show, as they do on every show on television. And I never really asked anybody who wrote what. It didn't matter. I just, if it was there and it was working, great. Didn't matter who wrote it. But I always assumed that Jamie wrote that monologue, because she's a little bit older than Tom, a little bit more experienced. It sounded like it might have come from her pen. And then after the fact, I found out, she told me that Brady wrote it. And at the time, I think Tom Brady was maybe 28 years old, did not have the writing experience or the life experience to really write that. And yet he did. And I thought it was incredible. It's a funny thing, because that monologue ended up carrying over, a big sort of montage sequence. And I remember at the time, Cole Meany was anxious to get out of there, because I think I don't think it's because he wasn't happy to be there. I think it was because he had another job and he was kind of fighting some schedule issues. Mm-hmm. And he had assumed that he would just do that in a voiceover booth, and we would just put it on the film. But we filmed it. We filmed the entire thing. I believe he was in Washington, D.C. at a congressional hearing when he was giving that speech. And so he wasn't prepared to act it in the way that he normally prepared to work on that show. And it was a bit of a scramble for him to get it together to do that monologue. And it's a credit to him. I just think he's a brilliant actor. And it's a credit to him that he pulled that off, more than pulled it off. I mean, he did a brilliant job with it, not having come to the set ready to do it, A lot of things like that happened on that show. We had some happy accidents, but we also had a really gifted group of people working on that show. That's my favorite job that I've ever had. I've had jobs since then, and many jobs before that, of course. But I've never, people in my part of the television business, there's a saying that you can be friendly with actors, but you can never really be friends with actors. And it took me a long time to figure out what that meant. And I sort of always, it's a bit of a cynical comment that I think probably I first heard from some of the gentlemen who I assumed to be about my age now when I was working for them, but were probably 20 years younger than I am now. But on this show, I ended up becoming very close with a lot of the actors on the show. And I have relationships with them to this day. As a matter of fact, my daughter lives in Seattle. She just had a baby. So my wife and I were up there for 6 weeks for that whole event. And we drove up there. We hadn't had a road trip in years. So we drove up and then we drove back. And as we were driving back, we were in Ashland, Oregon. And I happened to check Instagram and I saw that Robin McLeavy had posted some photos from California. And she lives in Tasmania, in, by New Zealand and Australia. So I reached out to her on Instagram and I said, hey, are you in California? And she said, no, I'm in Oregon now. And I said, what part of Oregon are you in? She said, I'm in Ashland. So through a really quirky set of circumstances, we were in Ashland, Oregon at the same time. So we got together for coffee a couple of days ago. And, I just love her. We're very close. She is very close with Chayla and Jennifer, the other two prominent women on the show. And they have a little coven, as they call it, their words, not mine. But it was such a pleasure to see her. And, Anson and I are still very close. We talk all the time. We've developed a couple of things together. And Chris Heyerdahl, of course, she's such a gifted, marvelous performer and a good man and a good friend. So a lot of things changed for me on that show. It upped my game because I wanted to give all those wonderful actors something that they could get their teeth into. And then so I demanded more of myself on the show, and I demanded more of the writers who were working with me on the show. And I think everybody stepped up. So, I'm very kind of soft and fuzzy about it now, looking back on it.
Well, something Anson and I were talking about, and I was aware of that with a couple of people, that they were originally hired during the first season for maybe 1 or 2 episodes. And as Anson puts it, this is advice to all young actors out there, make a good impression and make the writers look even better than they are, and they'll want to keep writing for you. And, he pointed out, Heyerdahl was only supposed to be in that 2nd episode of season 1. And he says, as soon as they saw what he was doing on the set, oh, no, we want this guy, around. The actor playing Psalms, and, the lady that you ran into in Oregon, Robin. Yeah. Her character, I think, was only supposed to be around for about a 4-episode arc. And it was like, oh, wait, So I find it funny. And yes, I can understand that. The idea that if you're a writer and, somebody comes in and does that with your words, you want to keep giving that person words.
Yeah. And you start, years ago, I was on a TV show, and I got hired on the 4th season of the series. And I was in my office writing a script, and there was a knock on the door. These 2 actors were standing there. And they said, hey, we want to introduce ourselves, because that show had a very powerful showrunner. And so everybody else was just kind of a worker bee. And these guys came into my office and they said, we wanted to thank you because we've been on the show for 4 seasons and we've never had a scene together, which sometimes happens, but we made an effort to kind of mix and match and put people together to see who clicked, there were certain people that Anson really clicked with, Heyerdahl being one of them. So we started to write that relationship, and that just sort of took on a life of its own, to where sort of began to take over the show toward the back end. And actually it was Tom Brady, I think, who came up with the idea. Actually, it's interesting because for a long time I thought Colin Bohannon would not survive the end of the series. And we had kind of worked out a way to kill that character off. There was lots of discussion, as you can imagine, about whether it was appropriate to do that or not. And we kind of waffled back and forth, and this went on for months. And I just wasn't sure if we should do it or not. I mean, in some ways it was a fitting ending, and in other ways it was really problematic. And finally, Jamie O'Brien came into the writer's room one day and she said, "So I've been on this journey with Colin Bohannon for 5 years. And now we shoot him in the face and he's dead? What's the point? Why did I take this ride with you guys?" I said, "You know what? That's the best argument I've ever heard." So we abandoned that idea. Then we had to deal with the Colin Swede relationship. We had introduced the idea of the Central Pacific and the whole Chinese connection to the Transcontinental Railroad, which really required us to spend some time on that story. And the Colin Swede story was beginning to overtake the series. So we had always planned to dispatch Swede at the end of the series. But Tom Brady came in one day and he said, "I think we should kill Swede in the first episode of the last season." And we all kind of went, okay, why? And he said, "Because we have a lot of other things to do." And this was a beautiful thing about that show. You know, I was a showrunner, for better or worse. You know, if there's credit to be had, it comes to me. I have to flow it downhill. And if, you know, people are angry, and I've read a lot of things about how people think I ruined the show because, you know, I'm a softie and I made it too humane, I guess. But there was talent there in that writer's room, and I embraced all of those people's ideas. And after some discussion, I realized that Tom was right. You know, we needed to be able to move past Swede. By the way, Tom and I wrote that episode. I think it was a two-parter, if I'm remembering correctly. And that's another thing that is one of the best things I've ever had my name on as a writer. That speech, which I can't remember if, you know, I can't remember now if Tom wrote it or if I wrote it. It was really brilliant, so Tom probably wrote it. But Swede in jail in that fort, when he kind of has that amazing monologue, soliloquy. And I remember being on set for that. It was probably 102 degrees out there. Everybody was really struggling, you know, just to make that film. And Chris was in that cage in the dirt, and he delivered, I was standing just off camera, and he delivered such a powerful soliloquy. And that scene, everybody had tears in their eyes because they knew it was the end of Swede. And strangely, it started to rain. You know, 102 degrees, you're out in the middle of the prairie, and all of a sudden you get like this rain shower. And when we got into editorial, the audio of the scene was unusable because of the rain.
Oh no. Oh
so
no.
I had the unenviable task of calling Heyerdahl and saying, "You're going to have to ADR that whole scene."
Oh.
And he did. And I think if you see it, if you don't know it, and you see it, you would never know it, because the performance is off the charts. But in the moment, it was really powerful.
Now, a couple of final things. I got to talk to Anson right fairly early on, first season. I did an interview with him. And even that early, he and I agree that, that it's a revenge plot. He's after the guys who killed his wife and his son. But there's only so much mileage you can get out of that. And he agreed that, it's going to have to evolve into something else if we're going to stay around. Well, you stayed around for 5 seasons. And one of the reasons you were around for 5 seasons is it did become something else. It became, the redemption of this guy. And at the end, he is, to a large degree, redeemed. And it's almost like at some point he and Cullen and we were supposed to forget all about the fact that there was still this one last guy out there he never found or never hooked up with. How important was it for him, for his redemption, you think of, as the showrunner, for him to have May? M-E? M-E-I.
May.
Yeah.
Well, again, the question of what woman would Cullen Bohannon get involved with out there on the railroad, because it's like, digressing for just a moment, when I came on in season 3, I was eager to create some roles for some more women, because I felt like we were underserving our female audience, although our female audience was primarily interested in Anson, let's be
yeah.
So, but I still think that I thought at the time we needed a few more women in the show, and it was really hard to kind of create characters for women because there really weren't any women on the railroad beyond some servant women, mostly people of color, Chinese, and prostitutes.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of, I'm familiar with the story about Nellie Bly, the famous New York reporter,
right.
Around the same time. And so I kind of created this character that we brought Jennifer into play.
Mm-hmm.
But she didn't, that character, it didn't feel like Cullen would get involved with that character, we kind of already done that with Lily Bell, and, so we were kind of looking for a different way to go. And the story of the girl who, masquerades as a boy, is a well-trod story, is that the story of Mulan, by the way?
Yes. Oh, yes.
So it kind of made sense, as long as you sort of stayed away from the tropes, as long as you could. And it just kind of made sense that somebody so out of the box, some, person that you would never think of, could wheedle their way into his soul and start to, peel the onion on the humanity that had been so clamped down with all of this protective armor that he had to put on based on his experiences. And that's how I kind of saw it episode to episode, is even before he knew she was a woman, that, his interactions with her were kind of unpeeling the onion and peeling off that armor.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had, he and Angie had such amazing chemistry that it just kind of happened, and there's another story that I'm just thinking of. We wanted to keep it a surprise that, I don't know how effective it was, if anybody ever watched that show and just thought she was a boy.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say in my own head they did, but there was when she came on the show, and she had been working for months before those episodes went on, and we were trying to keep a lid on the fact that a woman was playing this male character and that would be revealed as a woman at some point. And they had gone out to a movie, a bunch of the cast members, and there were some selfies taken, and they were posted on the internet, on social media. And somebody called me up and said, hey, Angie is in photographs with Anson with other cast members out at a movie in Calgary. And I was like, get those off the internet. So we had to jump on the phone and call all those people and say, pull all those pictures down. And they all went, oh, Doy, yeah, right, of course. So anyway, I think that character was absolutely essential in revealing aspects of Cullen's character that we couldn't get at in any other way. And again, I believe that was a Jamie O'Brien conceit, to create this character and have her, do what she did for us. And, we talked at the time, and I've given a fair amount of thought since, of what the next chapter of that story is. What did Cullen Bohannon find when he got to China? Did he find her? Was she alive? Did they have kids? I don't know.
Well, it's funny. This is something else I talked with Anson about. And I've had this conversation with filmmakers ranging from Alan Rudolph to Clint Eastwood. The idea that, okay, it's your movie, it's your TV show until the first time you show it to an audience. And then it's ours. Yeah. And we decide what happens to the characters after the ending. And you could probably get 50 different fans of the show, admirers of the show, and ask them, well, what happened afterwards? And you would probably get 50 different sets of assumptions and guesses and wishes, and each one of them would be right.
That's right. Yeah.
And I asked that, well, would you ever want to do like what they did with Deadwood, and maybe a few years from now do a TV movie to show what happened to everybody in the Hell on Wheels universe? And he said, nah, it wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be right. We'd never we'd never fulfill everybody's hopes.
Yeah, he and I have talked about that as well. I had a story that was based on, actually it was based on the first robbery of a train on the Transcontinental Railroad. It's a California story, and it took place, it involved a manhunt and all kind of, I have a house in the mountains in the high Sierras, and it took place in that area. And I thought, oh, this might be an interesting story for, after Hell on Wheels ended, if Cullen Bohannon came back and got involved in tracking down, if Mickey, for example, might have been involved with the robbers. And, I had cooked up this thing, and he and I talked about it, and he said, man, if I'm going to play that character again, you got to give me a reason to play that character again. And just leading a posse on a manhunt is not it. And I was like, yeah, you're right. You're right.
Well, one last thing. In getting back to Cullen's redemptive relationship, one of my favorite episodes, one of my favorite moments in the entire series, an episode called 61 Degrees, where they're dealing with the nitroglycerin.
Yes.
And at one point, the two of them just get it on the table where the nitroglycerin is.
It's insane.
And it's like, here are two people who, to put it inelegantly, have run out of fucks to give.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, we'll do this, and to hell with what might happen. And I think that, as much as anything, to me, and of course, I'm right because it's my show now. It's like, that's when you really realize they were soulmates.
Yeah.
They were lost. They had nothing left to lose. And so they connected with each other.
There's no shortage of nihilistic scenes in the show, but that may be the most nihilistic scene that we filmed. I thought it was kind of stunning, actually. And that was a very interesting episode, again, written by a very young guy. He had been our writer's assistant. We upped him to staff writer. And he wrote a couple of really nice episodes for us, and then went on to have a really nice movie career, which he's still enjoying. But yeah, I mean, people, myself included, were writing over their heads on that show. And I don't know why or how, but it was happening. And went totally underappreciated by a lot of people, as you suggested earlier in this conversation. I agree with that.
Well, it's on film, it's on video, it's on digital, whatever. So it'll be around forever.
Yep. And people discover it all the time. And, Joe, I cannot tell you how many people I meet who, when they find out I was on that show, talk to me about what that show meant to them. And that is really a pleasure, to have been involved in something that, has entertained people. And, there are a lot of people who can say that now because we have there's so much content out there.
Mm-hmm.
But this show was really special, and it lives on, and people are discovering it every day.
Well, thank you for the words. I appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thanks for your interest in the show, and you've done such a great job, with Cowboys and Indians, in, featuring the show and putting Anson on the cover of the magazine. I still have a couple copies of that one around here somewhere. Without people like you helping us reach a wider audience, it wouldn't happen. So thank you.
Well, thank you for the show, and thanks for the memories.
Yes, sir.
Take care now.
Your article. Take care.
Okay, be safe.
Bye-bye.